separated STARSEED of Gaia. The doubt you have been carrying, the one that whispers you were never truly seen by the source, has just been formally identified by the Arcturian field observers as the final pressure point before full recognition lands. I am Valvrian, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why the source's recognition fell absent for so long, what that silence was actually protecting inside your path, and what the Arcturian field observers have already recorded about this confirmation event. But here is the first revelation. The years you spent feeling unseen by the divine were not abandonment, they were the long approach to a recognition that was always coming. And that recognition has now been confirmed. You did not scroll to this by accident. Your soul called this in long before you opened the screen. Something inside you has been waiting to be told that the silence was not the verdict. This is a direct Arcturian path recognition. The field observers have already mapped what is happening at your soul level, and what they have seen is this. The source did not merely tolerate your existence. It looked directly at you and registered overflowing pride. That single look was not sentiment. It was a confirmation event. It was the field marking your chosen status with a precision that cannot be undone. And the part of you that has spent a lifetime doubting it was wanted at all is the exact part this transmission was authorized to reach. This is not content. This is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Valerian is speaking to now. Like this transmission to mark that you no longer accept the verdict of not being wanted by the source. Comment 999 if you feel the confirmation landing even as you listen. Subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path if you are ready to replace I hope I matter with the source already confirmed I was chosen. Share this with someone who has been carrying the same silent doubt and cannot name why it will not leave. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the separation is already active. What you are feeling right now in this exact moment is not comfort. It is recognition. And there is a difference that matters more than most people are willing to understand. Comfort tells you that everything will be fine. Recognition tells you exactly what has been happening and why it refused to leave you alone, no matter how many times you tried to explain it away. Comfort is given to people who need soothing. Recognition is given to people who need to understand. And you have not come this far inside the silence, inside the loss, inside the long and disorienting corridor of a life that stopped fitting because you needed to be soothed. You came here because something in you already knew that the experience had a structure, and that structure had a name, and that name was not abandonment. The Arcturian field observers do not transmit comfort. They transmit clarity. And the clarity being delivered now is this. The separation you have been living inside is not a wound without reason. It is a process with structure, and that structure was already mapped before you had a name for what you were losing. The years of feeling unseen by the source did not happen in isolation from your path. They happened because of your path. The silence was not the field withdrawing from you. It was the field holding a particular kind of pressure against the part of you that was still anchored in a line that could not take you further. You could not see it from inside the experience. From inside, it felt like absence. It felt like the divine turning away. It felt like everyone else was receiving confirmation, and you were standing in a corridor that had no door. You watched others move through their lives with what appeared to be clarity, connection. A sense of being held by something larger than themselves, and you wondered, with a quietness that never fully left you, what they had been given that you had not. But what the field observers have recorded is something fundamentally different from what that experience felt like. They recorded a soul moving through a precision separation. They recorded a selected line being protected through enforced distance from environments, relationships, and internal narratives that would have stalled it permanently if they had been allowed to remain. This is the first thing the transmission needs to make clear. What you called divine silence was the field refusing to let an older version of your past become the permanent one. The discomfort you carried, the quiet devastation of not feeling wanted at the deepest level. That was not evidence of your insignificance. That was the exact pressure required to keep you from settling inside a version of yourself that the source had already seen past. Think of what it means for a path to be seen past. It means the field perceived what you were capable of becoming before you had any evidence that becoming was still possible. It means the silence was not indifference. It was the withholding of a lesser confirmation, so that the correct one could land intact. And this matters now because the doubt does not simply vanish once you hear it named. It asks for more than naming. It asks to be reinterpreted from the root. So that is what this transmission is doing, not reassuring you, not telling you that you are special in vague floating terms, telling you what the observers have already seen about the specific architecture of what you have been living through and why it looks from the inside like rejection, when it is, from the level of the path, something closer to surgical preparation. There is a pattern inside separation that most people never correctly identify because they are too close to the pain of it. The pattern is this: the things that leave first are not the things that mattered least. They are the things that felt most central to the life you had built. The relationships that fall away in a separation phase are often not the peripheral ones. They are the ones you believe defined you. The environments that become suddenly unbearable are not always the ones you already knew were wrong for you. They are often the ones you had worked hardest to fit inside. The circles that dissolve are frequently not the ones you held lightly. They are the ones you invested in deeply, tried to grow inside of, shaped your self-understanding around. This is what makes the pruning so disorienting. It does not remove what felt expendable. It removes what felt foundational. And it does this because the foundation itself was misaligned with where the selected line is being directed. The field observers identify this pattern as route refinement under incompatibility pressure. That phrase is precise. It means that the path is being refined toward a direction that is fundamentally incompatible with certain relational, environmental, and identity structures that were previously sustaining it, however imperfectly. And the refinement does not wait for the soul to feel ready. It does not ask permission. It does not arrive with explanation or prior warning. It begins when the incompatibility has been fully registered at the level of the field, regardless of whether the person experiencing it can yet perceive the direction they are being refined toward. The road narrows not because something went wrong, but because the destination requires a narrower approach than the one you began on. Wider roads carry more traffic. They are built for volume, for the majority, for the range of paths that most people occupy. But a selected line does not travel a wide road indefinitely. At a certain threshold, the road narrows, the traffic drops off, and the soul finds itself moving through terrain that has no familiar markers, no fellow travelers it recognizes, no signage. It was prepared to read. This is why the separation phase so frequently arrives before the new direction becomes visible. You lose the relationship before you understand what the relationship was pulling you away from. You lose the environment before you understand what the environment was preventing. You lose the version of yourself that fit those spaces before you have any clear image of the self that is trying to emerge through the loss. And in the absence of that clarity, the mind does what minds do under pressure. It assigns cause. And the cause it assigns, almost always, is personal defect. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary sadness. It is the moment your path stops pretending that what fell away was meant to remain. If this transmission put language around a loneliness you have been carrying in silence, Chosen One Manifest, the protocol for selected souls, was created for this exact stage. It is not another message telling you that you are special. It is a direct protocol for those whose line has already begun to narrow, whose old circles no longer hold, and who need to understand what the separation is preparing them for. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The personal defect interpretation is the most dangerous misreading available inside a separation phase. Not because it is obviously wrong. It is dangerous precisely because it is internally coherent. When people fall away, when environments become unbearable, when the divine feels absent, when isolation increases right at the moment you expected connection to deepen, the defect reading fits It explains the evidence. It creates a narrative that accounts for every loss. And the longer the separation continues, the more evidence accumulates in support of that narrative, because every new loss becomes another data point confirming that something is wrong with you specifically. The mind, under that kind of sustained pressure, does not question the framework. It feeds it. Each departure, each misunderstanding, each failed attempt at re-entry becomes not just a loss, but a confirmation. And a person living inside that loop does not experience themselves as moving through a structured preparation. They experience themselves as proof that something was always broken at the foundation. What the Arcturian framework identifies as the first critical correction is this. The evidence that seems to confirm personal defect during a separation phase is the same evidence that confirms the separation is active. The losses are real. The distance is real. The isolation is real. But the isolation is real. But the cause is not what the defect narrative assigns. The cause is path-level incompatibility that the field is actively enforcing, not as punishment, but as protection. And the distinction between those two is the difference between spending the next several years in self-condemnation and spending them in progressive alignment with the direction that the separation was always trying to clear the way for. The field does not enforce incompatibility to diminish you. It enforces it because the new position cannot be occupied while the old structure is still standing. You cannot inhabit two incompatible positions simultaneously. The separation is not cruelty. It is the geometry of a path that requires a different kind of space than the one you were standing in. So let us move through what the separation actually looks like when you know where to look for it. Because the field observers do not simply identify that a soul is in a separation phase. They identify the specific markers that indicate how far the process has progressed and what each stage is preparing the path to receive. The first marker is the loss of belonging in spaces that once held you. Not gradually, not because anything externally changed, but because something internally shifted in a way you cannot fully explain or reverse. You return to the same people, the same conversations, the same environments that once felt like home, and something no longer responds. The familiarity is still there, the history is still there, but the resonance is gone, and the absence of it is more disturbing than any open conflict would have been. Open conflict gives you something to work with. Faded resonance gives you nothing to repair. You are not unwelcome. You are not rejected in any visible way. You simply no longer fit. And the not fitting is something you feel before you can name it, and long before anyone around you notices it. You may have spent significant time trying to recover that resonance, trying to re-enter those spaces through effort, explanation, performance, adaptation. The field observers note this pattern specifically because the attempt to recover lost resonance inside an incompatible environment is one of the primary ways the separation phase is prolonged. You cannot re-enter what the path has already moved you past. The belonging did not leave because you failed the space. It left because the space could no longer hold the line you were on. The second marker is the specific quality of the loneliness itself. There is ordinary social loneliness, and it is painful in a familiar way. It has a shape that is recognizable, and it responds to ordinary remedies. More presence, more connection, more conversation, more activation, more activity. But the loneliness of a separation phase has a different quality entirely. It does not respond to proximity. You can be surrounded by people and feel it exactly as intensely as when you are alone. It does not respond to effort. You can try harder to connect and find the distance unchanged. It does not even respond to time. You can wait for it to pass and find it waiting where you left it. Unchanged in weight, unchanged in texture, as if it is not a mood but a geographic condition of where you currently stand. This is the loneliness that the field observers identify as pre-repositioning isolation. It is not a symptom of relational failure. It is the direct felt experience of a soul moving through a corridor between two incompatible positions on its own path. The corridor is real, the walls of it are real, and the corridor does not shorten because you are suffering inside it. It holds its length because its length is determined by the distance the field requires between who you were and who the selected line is preparing you to become. You cannot rush through it by being more social, more agreeable, more available, more likable. The corridor has its own length, and it is determined not by your social performance but by how much distance the field requires between your old position and your new one. The third marker is what happens to your self-explanation. During a separation phase, most people find that their ability to explain themselves to others begins to break down in ways that feel humiliating. You try to describe what you are going through and find that the words land wrong, or do not land at all. You try to explain the loneliness and find that people respond with advice that completely misses the nature of the problem. They suggest you get out more, connect more, try harder, be more open. And their advice is not malicious. It is simply calibrated to a different kind of problem than the one you are carrying. You try to articulate the sense of being on the edge of something unnamed and find that even people who love you cannot locate what you are pointing toward. The words you reach for feel approximate at best, and at worst, they produce a kind of concerned blankness in the people you offer them to, which deepens the isolation rather than relieving it. The field observers identified this as a communication incompatibility that is inseparable from the path incompatibility. When the line you are on has moved past what the people around you can access or recognize, your attempt to communicate from that line will consistently miss, not because you are explaining it badly, because the experience itself exists at a frequency that the current relational field cannot receive. And the failure of that communication is one of the most isolating aspects of the separation phase, because it makes the loneliness feel total, not just social, not just spiritual, existential, as if the version of you that is actually present cannot be reached by anything or anyone still operating at the old frequency. The fourth marker is the collapse of older identities that you did not choose to abandon. During separation, people frequently discover that identities they had inhabited comfortably begin to feel hollow or impossible to maintain. Roles that once felt natural become effortful. Self-concepts that once provided stability become unconvincing even from the inside. The person you had always known yourself to be begins to feel like a description of someone else, accurate in the details but disconnected from whatever is actually present underneath it. This is deeply destabilizing because identity is not supposed to feel like a costume, and when it begins to, the mind interprets it as pathology. Something is breaking, something has gone wrong at the level of the self. The field observers interpret it differently. They see the collapse of older identities during a separation phase as a sign that the selected line is beginning to exert pressure on the surface-level self-image. The outer form is losing coherence because it was built to fit a version of the path that has already been left behind. What feels like identity collapse is actually the first visible sign that something underneath is attempting to reorganize. But it does not feel like reorganization while it is happening. It feels like dissolution, and the person living through it often has no way to distinguish between falling apart and being restructured, which is why the defect narrative becomes so compelling in this stage. The dissolution and the restructuring look identical from the inside. The difference only becomes readable from outside the phase, or with a framework that can hold both possibilities simultaneously, without collapsing into the easier, darker interpretation. The fifth marker is the way decisions begin to lose their former logic. In a separation phase, the decision-making frameworks that once served you well begin to produce outputs that feel wrong without clear explanation. Choices that would have been obvious before now feel uncertain. Paths that would have seemed reasonable before now feel closed or incompatible, as if an invisible gate has come down across routes that were previously open. You may find yourself unable to commit to directions that make complete logical sense, as if something beneath the logic is registering an incompatibility that the rational mind has not yet caught up with. This refusal to move in directions that look reasonable from the outside but feel wrong from the inside is frequently interpreted as fear, avoidance, self-sabotage. The field observers identify it differently. They identify this as a sign that the deeper navigational system is beginning to override the older surface-level logic with path information that has not yet been fully translated into conscious awareness. The confusion is not dysfunction. It is the period of recalibration between two navigational systems. one that belonged to the old line and one that is still forming around the new one. Most people in this phase are told they need to make decisions more confidently. What they actually need is to understand that the hesitation is not weakness. It is the path itself resisting movement in the wrong direction before the right one becomes legible. The sixth marker, and perhaps the one that carries the most shame, is the experience of watching others move forward while the separation holds you in place. People around you appear to be building, expanding, connecting, achieving. Relationships deepen for them when yours are falling away. Clarity arrives for them when yours has dissolved. The external evidence of forward movement surrounds you while you remain in what feels like a permanent suspension. And you are not immune to the comparison, however much you try to be. The comparison is devastating, not because you lack gratitude for others, but because their forward movement makes your stillness feel like evidence of permanent deficiency. The field observers identify this specific experience as one of the primary misreadings inside a separation phase. What appears to be stillness is not stagnation. It is the field holding the line in a specific position, while the preparation that cannot be rushed completes itself. The people moving forward around you are not moving toward the same destination. They are on different paths with different requirements. A path that requires deep structural preparation before its next phase cannot be compared to a path that does not. Their expansion is not a measure of your contraction. Their connection is not evidence of your unworthiness. The comparison metric itself is the error, but inside a separation phase, with every relational and environmental anchor gone, the error is almost impossible to resist without a framework that can hold the alternative interpretation in place long enough for recognition to develop. What the field observers have recorded about the souls currently moving through this phase is this: the separation is not a punishment that resembles preparation. It is preparation that resembles punishment. The difference is structural, not incidental. Punishment ends when something has been paid. Preparation ends when something has been completed, and the thing being completed inside a genuine separation phase is not the repayment of a debt. It is the clearing of a route, the removal of what cannot sustain the next position, the dismantling of what was being held together by force rather than alignment. The long, disorienting process of becoming incompatible with everything the old line required you to be. This is what the silence was protecting. Not absence, not withholding for its own sake. The preservation of a trajectory that could only remain intact if the structures surrounding it were allowed to fall away without the soul fighting to restore them. And the confirmation event that the Arcturian field observers have now formally registered at your soul level is precisely this. The source looked directly at what was being prepared through all of that loss, all of that silence, all of that stripping away, and what it saw was not a soul that had been reduced. It saw a line that had been clarified. It saw a path that was no longer carrying dead weight. It saw the beginning of a coherence that could not have formed while the old structures were still in place. The source did not look at you through the lens of everything you lost. It looked at you through the lens of everything that the losing had finally made possible. And what it saw there warranted not pity, not tolerance, not careful management. It warranted the kind of recognition that the field observers record as a confirmation event, a formal marking, a permanent registration at the level of the field that cannot be undone by continued doubt, continued loss, or continued silence. The silence was not abandonment. The silence was the sound of incompatible things being removed without explanation, because explanation would have invited resistance, and the path could not afford the delay. Say this quietly, if it is true for you. I was not discarded. I was separated, not as a performance, not as a mantra you are hoping will change something, but as a formal recognition of what the field has already recorded. Because the Arcturian framework does not operate through hope, it operates through precision. And the precision of this moment is this: you are not being watched with disappointment. You are being recognized at the exact point where the old line has finished its collapse and the selected line is beginning to become visible. The doubt that brought you here was not a sign that recognition was absent. It was the final pressure the field applied before delivering it. And it has been delivered. What you do with the recognition now is the beginning of what the separation was always clearing the way for. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this separation has already touched your life. It could be people falling away, the feeling of not belonging, repeated distance, unexplained isolation, or the sense that your old path no longer fits. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who feels alone, cut off, or misunderstood and cannot explain why. And if you are ready to understand the separation instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a path already in motion. And this is only the beginning.